今天看到一段视频，是上个月6月份在匈牙利某论坛举办的一档谈话节目。参与谈话的嘉宾有英国前首相利兹特拉斯、美国芝加哥大学政治学教授约翰米尔斯海默、印度总理经济顾问委员会成员桑基夫桑亚尔，以及中国的观察者网创始人、成为资本董事长李世默。谈话围绕世界格局由单极走向多极，旧的世界秩序分崩离析，新的世界秩序正在形成这一大的地缘政治背景而展开。其中李世默和米尔斯海默直接交锋的片段让人印象深刻，尤其是李世默对米尔斯海默所提到的关于全球化、关于所谓的自由国际秩序以及美国对华策略的合理性等问题提供了一种非西方视角，是一种观念的碰撞，体现的认知上的分歧。李世默说出了很多中国人想要说的话。我略过英国和印度代表的发言，把李世默和米尔斯海默的交流分享给大家。主持人问米尔斯海默，你如何看待当今的全球化？米尔斯海默认为，近年来最重要的事件就是世界从单极走向多极。1989年之前是美苏两极，冷战结束后是美国单极，大约在2017年前后进入中美俄三个大国的世界。单极世界的美国在全球发号施令，建立了全球经济秩序，而一旦进入多极格局，像中国这样的国家会通过建立自己的机制，例如金砖国家组织和一带一路倡议，来塑造国家间的互动方式。之前的全球化、全球秩序以及自由国际秩序就会分崩离析，被一种新秩序取而代之。这个是米尔斯海默在各种场合表达过无数次的观点。李世默是怎么回应的呢？他同意全球化遇到了麻烦，前途堪忧，并且毫不客气地指出，正是美西方自己造成了这样的局面。而对于米尔斯海默暗示的中国没有按约定遵守美国建立的所谓自由国际秩序，李世默提出了质疑。
I think the last round of globalization, which has been about 30 years, maybe 40 years, had of course generated tremendous amount of economic prosperity and wealth. And China certainly was one of the largest beneficiaries of this globalization, and so has the United States been. Both of our countries' GDP went up significantly. China went up a lot more because we began at a lower base. But the problem with globalization as it stands is, I think, it cannot go on for two reasons. One is, I think, within the United States and the West, somehow the economic benefits derived from globalization weren't distributed in a way that satisfied multiple segments of its population. So it's led to an internal revolt against globalization. So the architect of this first round of globalization is having internal resistance to it. So that's, of course, leading to deglobalization, because the leader of the globalization was saying, we don't want to do this anymore. And the second issue is, of course, that the largest developing country that participated in globalization was China. And in the beginning, I think they had designed it in a way that the US and Western countries were at the core of globalization, and there were countries, developing countries, at the periphery. And the division of labor was clear. You know, the US and Western Europe were going to be in charge of R&D and finance and military, and we're going to do cheap labor and sell natural resources if we had them. China didn't have them, but others had them, and provide market. But of course, as China grew, it said, no, we didn't agree to that. We're going to move up the value chain. And unfortunately, the US and certain Western countries, they thought this, perceived that as a threat. So they didn't want to do that anymore. So I think we're in, globalization is in trouble. But let me also comment on the liberal international order. I'm not sure where that came from. Certainly when China signed up to the WTO, it wasn't told it was signing up to the liberal international order. It wasn't such thing. I mean, I think it was made up in retrospect. I mean, I think when President Jiang went to Washington, when China was trying to enter the WTO, President Bill Clinton didn't say, hey, President Jiang, you're signing up to the liberal international order. It didn't happen. So it was never there. So that's my 2 cents.
米尔斯海默接着提到一种现在在西方政治圈里很盛行的观点，即美西方助力了中国的崛起，认为这是美国的战略误判。现在对中国高科技的打压以及关税战都是美国纠偏手段的一部分。李世默对此并不认同，辛辣地指出美西方绝非慈善家，中国获得发展的同时，美西方同样从中攫取了巨额利益，并再次表明中国在加入世贸组织时对奉行所谓自由主义并无半个字的承诺。而如果美国现在想用退出全球化的手段打压中国，中国无所畏惧，有十足的信心适应这个新局面。
Eric made the point that both China and the United States got much richer during the unipolar moment when we had globalization, and he's of course correct. And the United States didn't care about that because the United States thought that once China got really rich and it got embedded in international institutions, it would become a responsible stakeholder, to use Robert Zoellick's term, and then it would become a democracy, and once it was a democracy, we'd all live happily ever after. This would be the end of history. That was the basic idea. But it didn't turn out that way because once China got really powerful economically, it translated that economic might into military might, and it began to throw its muscle around. And this, of course, scared the living bejesus out of the Americans, and the Americans have moved to counter China. We now care about relative gains. See, Eric was talking about absolute gains where we're both getting rich. And we didn't care about relative gains then. But now that China's a great power, we care about relative gains. So what we want to do is we want to maximize American growth, and we want to minimize Chinese growth. Anything we can do to slow down the Chinese economy and refurbish the American economy, we will do. And you see this reflected in the competition over cutting-edge technologies. We're extremely scared that China is going to beat us in terms of developing cutting-edge technologies. Now, where do tariffs come in? Tariffs are part of the story. What we're trying to do with tariffs is modernize, refurbish the American industrial base, make us much more competitive, and we're trying to weaken China at the same time. Because again, we care about relative power. And all of this is to say that I agree with you, Liz, that we made a fundamental mistake in the 1990s and in the first 20 years of the 21st century in helping China to become Godzilla. It's come back to haunt us, and we're now trying to rectify that. And again, tariffs are part of that story.
Let me comment on that.
Let Eric comment on this.
I think well, of course, like I said, both countries benefit tremendously. But if the United States, certainly the US did not set up the system and ask China to join out of charity. I really don't think so. They thought that they would benefit too. That's number one. Number two, if the US thought that if China develops and eventually will become a liberal country, they never told us that. Nobody told us that. It was a secret intent. It wasn't disclosed in the prospectus. Okay, we signed up to WTO, and there was a prospectus, there were a bunch of rules, a lot of text, a lot of words, nothing in it that said, hey, if your economy develops, you must become a liberal society. It wasn't there. We didn't sign up to that, like I said. So I think, well, look, if the U.S. is now changing its path, changing its direction, that's completely within its power to do. It's a sovereign nation. Tariffs and all of that, if the globalization, if the United States wants to ditch globalization for its own needs, I think China will adapt. Everybody has to adapt. It's okay. I think China will do okay in this new era, and it will adapt.
米尔斯海默接着展望，在未来许多年里，世界会像第一次世界大战前那样，既有激烈的安全竞争，又有紧密的经济相互依存，而不是像冷战时那样，东西方之间几乎没有经济往来。他同时表示，欧洲或者印度可以与中国开展贸易，只要不向中国出售或转让尖端技术，美国就会对此容忍，否则美国肯定不高兴。而李世默同样对此予以了批驳。
Eric?
I think if the United States wants to contain China through technological means, which is understandable, then I think they're pursuing very mistaken tactics. I mean, I don't understand why. I mean, because by cutting off semiconductor, for instance, when Mr. Biden did, and the Chinese were asleep at the wheel for a long time on the stuff. They woke up the Chinese and said, whoa, this is what they could do to us. And listen, we graduate more STEM students than the rest of the world combined. Okay, and we got research dollars more than the rest of the world combined. If you don't think we can lick semiconductor, you gotta be out to lunch. I mean, so I just don't. I mean, I just don't think that's the productive way to go about it. And by the way, I totally understand. I think the Chinese understand the U.S. wants to reindustrialize. If I were running the United States, I would want to reindustrialize too. I just wish there could be a friendlier way to go about it externally. And I actually think, that's why I'm actually reasonably optimistic. I actually think the Chinese would be willing to cooperate and maybe contribute to that effort. Certainly China is the largest industrial power in the world. There's some kind of accommodation that could be reached, I believe, if we pursue a friendlier atmosphere.
以上两人的对话体现了米尔斯海默的现实主义与李世默非西方视角的碰撞。米尔斯海默以体系结构和权力竞争为核心，强调多极时代大国对相对势力的争夺是国际关系的主线，全球化和国际秩序需让位于这一逻辑，对未来持悲观态度。李世默则更注重现实利益分配和历史叙事的合理性，质疑西方主导的秩序框架，主张从实际互动如中美利益交汇点出发寻找解决方案，保留一定乐观空间。整体而言，两人均认为全球化已进入调整期，大国竞争将主导未来国际格局，但对竞争的烈度和合作的可能性存在分歧，反映了现实主义理论与非西方实践视角对国际关系的不同解读。